Shout out to all the lovers, haters, subscribers, and debaters. Still sweating my ass off in Nam, trying my best to skip through the minefield that is laws, language, customs, education in, well, every country. But I have something a bit different for you today. As useful as I think it is to show problems with argumentation, there is also great benefit in agreement. So, Afy is going to actually agree with someone? Afy is talking about beliefs instead of fallacies? Afy's going to give his opinions. Afy's talking about himself in the third person? Afy, well, let's see what I'm on about. I don't have heroes. I think that putting anyone on some plateau of perfection is a pathetic position for an imperfect person. Say that 5 times fast. I have a lot of respect for Bruce Lee and Jeet Kune Do, but see Wing Chun as, well, trash. I like to listen to Christopher Hitchens, but disagree with some of his arguments. I'm not a fan of Trump's personal attacks, nor Biden's apparent cognitive state. I'm equally annoyed by Tucker's stupid takes as I am by Kamala's stupid statements. I never thought I would say it, but it does seem like Dr. Phil, believe it or not, is on the right track. This was a very long interview, so I apologize for the edits. I hope I have correctly embodied each person's points and ideas. So hit the like button, or don't. Subscribe, or don't. Agree, or tell me where I'm wrong. Let's see if we can move the conversation forward, as opposed to screaming like children. Take it away, gentlemen.
It seems like you're throwing yourself into the thick of it here. You're pushing back against a lot of ideas that are very popular in your industry of mainstream media. Does it feel like a bit of a war zone?
Sometimes it does. It seems like the more commonsensical I get, the more I rattle people's cages. But that's okay. I'm used to it.
To be or not to be. The famous Hamlet lines can and have been dissected at length. Personally, I think art is very subjective, despite the pleas of one of my poetry teachers. For me, and many others, Hamlet here is trying to decide whether he should live or die, sure. But for me at least, it's a little bit more than that. We have a daily choice. Should we speak and act in accordance with our beliefs, or should we not? And in so doing, at least metaphorically, die. When we're not being true to ourselves, the self is, in a way, dying. The flip side, of course, is that when we are true to ourselves, we're often attacked by others who disagree.
I saw a study recently of Illinois public schools in 2022 that found 0 students passed the state math proficiency test at 53 public schools, almost all of whom are majority black. And at one school, which is a prep school designed to prepare students for their medical careers, the per-student spending's $47,000. For reading, it's only 30 schools, and only 1 out of 10 kids, or less, can do math at a grade level in 930 schools, which is more than a quarter of all of the schools in the state. What do you think is happening with academia?
Well, that's a complex question that requires a complex answer, but I can tell you the result of it.
Having taught multiple subjects to many different age groups in 6 countries, I'm in a rare position to comment on this. Education has become, to varying degrees, a business. The model isn't about learning or teaching. It's about attracting students and retaining students, while offering platitudes and buzzwords that sound educational. At our school, we use a targeted, holistic approach that maximizes your inner potential to become the specific individual that you are destined to become. Here, we build community by honoring all traditions. George Carlin would have a lot to say about some of the slogans used in today's purportedly educational facilities. Without standardized testing, teachers and schools can claim that students are doing well with zero grounding in reality. When we do not give students a failing grade, we're not only harming their future lives, but also their classmates' future successes. If one cannot read or do basic math or other important things, continuing as if they can teaches them that this is not important. It is. This is the participation trophy, which is a great idea in kindergarten, but a terrible idea not long thereafter. But it also hurts the classmates. When Johnny doesn't understand addition and the class is now doing multiplication, he will need extra help from the teacher, which draws time from the teacher addressing the class. Or Johnny may act out, disrupting the class. A third possibility is Johnny isolating himself, and this is potentially the worst outcome. Those who don't see themselves as belonging tend to act out against society in ways that can sometimes be very, very destructive. Or sometimes they're just generally disregarded. But all of this is interestingly secondary. The situation is quite simple. In the recent past, student grades were much, much better. Now they are very, very bad. So what changed? Examine that. Make predictions. Test them. Solve the problem. My current school is one of the largest English language schools in Vietnam. Vietnam is currently ranked 58th in International English Language Ranking. Yet, my school is of the opinion that their method of education is best. Is anyone able to square that circle? Imagine a hospital with a similar outlook. Well, we're not helping a huge percentage of our patients, yeah, but we are getting more and more patients every year. What a success story.
I don't understand what is happening if basic reading and maths competence isn't being met.
Well, a lot of these school systems have adopted programs of teaching subject matters that just simply didn't work. And there was no empirical data to suggest that it would work. But yet they spent millions and millions of dollars on these teaching programs that just simply don't work. But they've embraced them. They've spent money on them. They put time into them. But they're not yielding the results.
Precisely. Making a choice of methods is required. If the outcomes of that method are preferable, keep it. If the outcomes are not preferable, toss it. Bruce Lee said, absorb what is useful, discard what is not, and add what is uniquely your own. It was Albert Einstein who said, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. This is what Dr. Phull is pointing at. If it doesn't work, don't use it. But this is the opposite of what we have seen in education in many countries around the world for more than a decade.
Yeah, you say that trends that we're seeing aren't the result of society's natural evolution, but they've been unquestioningly designed to undermine our society in general and the family unit in particular. If that's right, who is designing them?
Well, it depends on which area you're talking about. Let's talk about, for example, both unintended consequences and intended consequences. I think, for example, if we recognize that right now we're seeing a generation that is dealing with the internet, the technology of the smartphone, the technology of iPads and access to information that a generation ago simply wasn't there. Now, some of this is by design, some of it is unintended consequences. For example, I started the Dr. Phull Show in 2002. I started being on television several years before that. But when I started the Dr. Phull Show, the first text message had never been sent. There weren't any text messages. It wasn't a thing. They didn't do that. Think how much things have changed since then. Because about 08, 09, It's like big airplanes flew over the United States and just dropped smartphones on this society. And I think that was the biggest change in the human race since the Industrial Revolution. Think about what happened with the Industrial Revolution. Up until that point, we were very much an agricultural society, right? We farmed, we grew the foods that we ate, and that was the cycle. And so like 95% of society was agricultural. Okay, then you move forward 25 years and maybe it's dropped now. But then when the Industrial Revolution hit, everything got mechanized, people moved into the city, and a lot of changes took place. Nothing has changed the human race like that until the advent of the internet and the smartphone.
First, I'm not sure that any of this has been unquestioningly designed. I'm more than willing to entertain the notion, but I haven't heard enough evidence to convince me of some malicious overlords who are attempting to implement this. Rather, I tend to think of it as ignorance in the area. Take, as an example, the fact that most people have a belief in aliens, as existing or not, and as having visited or not. To this, they are of course entitled. However, how many of these people, on any side, understand the Drake equation? How many are familiar with the Fermi paradox? How many of them can name more than one solution to the paradox? How many will accept or reject anecdotal evidence on this topic, but not on other topics, or vice versa? This is what I mean. Without a reasonable grasp on the different potential ideas, factors, and concepts, people will come to ignorant conclusions. Be they correct or incorrect, the conclusions remain ignorant. Dr. Phull does a fantastic job here of trying to break down the problem. There are very often confounding variables that are not investigated or seen by people when coming to their conclusions. Perhaps a change in education is not the problem or the sole problem. Perhaps there exists other differences which are the cause, or at very least are at play here. Cell phones are a great example. There are many, many other potential issues. Looking at a problem and attributing it to one variable only is a large part of what the race hustler narrative is. Looking at a multivariable problem through a single variable analysis is, well, not only simple-minded, but unhelpful. Dr. Phull is also quite right about the change in society with the introduction and mass use of the smartphone and internet. The Kardashev scale is a really interesting idea to look at here. It is suggested that a Type 1 society would have to have world communication. That is precisely what the smartphone has done. It has pushed our Type 0 society further towards a Type 1. This is a huge step in what may be called the evolution of our society. Careful, society here meaning the society of Earth.
You know, that's maybe an unintended consequence. You said, okay, so who is it that's got these conspiracies that are after us? Well, let's look at the social media companies, for example. People know that their kids spend too much time on social media. What they don't know is that those are driven by algorithms. And those algorithms are feeding these children content that is designed to upset them. They're not giving them content they want to see. They're not giving them content that uplifts them. They're giving them content that upsets them mentally and emotionally. Why? Because that gets them clicking more. And the more they click, the longer they're on. The longer they're on, the more ads they can run by them. The more ads they run by them, the more shared rev they have.
Ooh, careful. You've made an argument, which I agree with, that social media companies are in the business of making money. Unfortunately, you use this argument to show that there exist people who are intentionally undermining our society. This sounds like a non sequitur. It just doesn't follow. I would argue that although they may very well be harming society, that isn't their goal. As you stated, their goal is money. A result of this goal certainly seems to be societal harm. But look at education. It is the same problem. The teachers, trainers, managers, and owners that I have worked with and for over the years, I wouldn't say any of them are intentionally trying to hurt students or education in general. Their goal is to make money, or perhaps to help, but with misguided ideas about education. The fact that they are hurting students does not mean that is their goal. It could simply be an unintended consequence of poor decisions. Hanlon's razor. Never attribute to malice that which is adequately explained by stupidity.
Most of the information that people get on the internet at the moment is built not to teach them about the world or tell them anything that's true, but to just be the most viral, mimetically absorbable messaging that they can. And what you see with this is messages that are the most viral are the ones that go the furthest, not the ones that are the most accurate. A good example of this would be America is a bad country. It's uniquely cursed or toxic or malign in some way. And you put a really interesting study up about patriotism on the decline, and that's just falling through the floor. It's like a tiny amount compared. It's like less than half of what it was only a short while ago.
Yeah, and that's shocking. That's shocking, and that's troubling to me because I love this country. I mean, I really do. Is it perfect? Of course not. I mean, we've got things we need to work on, but I love this country, and I love it enough to acknowledge that there are problems with it. But there are things that we need to acknowledge them in order to work on them. But there are things that you put on your to-do list. It's not things that you reject the entire American experiment because it's not perfect. It's just things you put on your to-do list, things that you want to do a better job of.
Well said. I am far from perfect. Every day I try to inch my way closer to better, although, to be fair, there are many days when it's all I can do to simply try not to become worse. The fact that none of us are perfect doesn't mean we are bad. The concept of patriotism, however, that is more tricky. Let's look at it in the present and past versus the future. In the past and present, patriotism is and was a very important notion. Cultural cohesion, progress, living in societies, fighting wars, creating and ceasing laws, and a great many other issues work well if we all care deeply about our country. This is prerequisite. In the future, however, things change a bit. Imagine a distant future. In that future, do we still have different countries who believe different things? If there exist no or little differences in the beliefs, then what is the point of countries at all? Or patriotism? Unless we were to change the meaning from country to planet, in which case I would certainly agree. Again, I'm not talking about now. There is a huge need for border security in countries today. But let's take a more concrete example. Today, all around the world, we have people leaving countries for many reasons and entering other countries. In some of those cases, we have people complaining about the beliefs, practices, and actions these new people are bringing with them. There would be no need to complain or even limit migration if these differences didn't exist. People would not move to places where housing or food is limited when they could simply move to another place if all else were equal. Idealistic, to be sure, but nothing wrong with aiming at a target. I don't support the WEF or Captain Klaus at all. However, the notion of a Type 1 society from the Kardashev scale does not necessitate King Klaus's dystopia. There are countless other ways.
But yeah, I've said that I think a lot of these elite universities right now are not teaching critical thinking. You've got a lot of this ideology that it sounds to me a lot like socialism, sounds to me a lot like Marxism, teaching that we're going to be successful when we have equality of outcome. That's insane. Like, you're never going to have equality of outcome because you have different qualities of input. You have some people that work hard, you have some people that don't. You have some people that are smart and talented, you have some people that aren't. You have different levels of input, you're going to have different quality of outcome.
Spot on, my man. And I've been saying it to 30 or so people who are probably tired as hell always hearing it for years. We are not teaching critical thinking. That is the problem. I very recently had a conversation where my interlocutor was suggesting that critical thinking would not result in people agreeing, whereas listening to music would. Basically, that critical thinking is subjective and music is objective. What can be said to such a person? In terms of ideology, here's a hot take. Ideology is laziness. It's not necessarily bad or wrong, but it is lazy. Let me make a small distinction, as I've had people misunderstand this before. I'm not saying a personal set of ideas is lazy. I'm saying a group set of ideas is lazy. I would call the first the set of my beliefs. The second I would call an ideology. But honestly, it seems that most people already know this. Consider religions. Yes, there are fundamentalists who believe their religion to the very letter of Scripture, but these are by far the minority. And most see these people as extreme, even those who follow the same basic tenets. Most people who are Muslim don't follow every item from their holy books, nor do Christians follow every word from theirs. Most feminists report to be this or that wave and reject some other bits. Flat earthers disagree with each other, as do tarot card readers, spirituality gurus, Democrats and Republicans, scientists, etc., etc. Yes, people are busy and don't have time to analyze every single part of every single argument in order to come to a decent understanding of the issue. No worries. Completely understood. I don't have the time to study the mating rituals of three-nutted gym bros, but neither do I speak on the topic with any degree of conviction. All this to say something simple. Accept any ideology you like, but if you're not willing to put in the work to examine the beliefs which that ideology entails, just like Michael Knowles in my second last video, arguing from an ideology has zero effect on those who do not share that ideology. You actually have to do the work and examine the issue. Dr. Phull also addressed equity here, meaning equality of outcome. He provided a very good reason why this is silly, but in case you need another, it's impossible because of the lack of limitations on groups. But when we limit groups, we're not being equitable. Let's say we could make all jobs 49% male and 51% female. We may find it difficult to find enough males to be pole dancers, just as we may find it difficult to find enough females to be sumo wrestlers. But why are we only grouping males and females? For true equity, we also must differentiate based on race. But why stop there? Why not religion, height, weight, mental stability, social class, and on and on? Until there are actual limitations on which groups we are trying to equalize, the conversation is a non-starter. Unfortunately, if we were to limit the groups, by definition, there would be groups who are not equalized. Basically, then, we could never have equity, and as we attempt to get closer, we are moving away from competency. Give everyone the same chances in life, as best we can, and let their personal desires, strengths, and choices lead them in their own lives. Equality of opportunity.
Yeah, and they're medicalizing those feelings. You know, we used to get our feelings hurt, so okay, sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me. But now they've medicalized that. So when they say, okay, this professor asked me to write a paper that's contrary to my value system, and I'm offended. So I've now entered the offendedness sweepstakes, and I'm telling you that that's mentally and emotionally hurt me. So it's like the intentional infliction of emotional distress. You go file that complaint with the dean's office, they've now got to deal with that.
First off, one of the most valuable things anyone can do is to attempt to understand the arguments against their own beliefs. This could be seen as a definition of critical thinking, taking a critical look at what one thinks. I've covered the offended bits many times. Quickly, you're telling me how you feel. I feel the opposite. This is a conversation between children. I care as much how you feel as you care how I feel. Truth is not about feelings. Save the feelings for your support animal. Or, as Candace Owens recently quipped, life's tough. Get a helmet.
If we start lowering standards, and there are some schools that grade someone on math, for example, based on their willingness to learn it, their interest in learning it.
What does that even mean?
I had just accepted a position as an academic coordinator for a small franchise of schools a number of years ago. Wanting to put my finger on the pulse, so to speak, I set up a one-on-one meeting with each and every teacher. I asked what they liked about the schools and what were some problems they had encountered. Of note, one teacher said the testing was bad. I asked if she had suggestions. Her answers floored me. She suggested that we were to throw out all of the tests. I asked her how we should grade the students, the teachers, or the school in regards to other schools. Her answer was to simply ask the students how they felt about the course. To be sure I wasn't misunderstanding, I asked, "You mean we should give an A to a student who simply says they've learned a lot and an F to a student who says they didn't learn anything?" "No," she said, "we shouldn't give an F. That student should get an A because they already knew the material." "Oh, sorry. Okay, so every student gets an A?" "Yes." OMFG. After ending the video chat, I wondered how in the hell this person ever became a teacher, but as Dr. Phull points out, this is where we are.
The problem is that academia and the qualifications and the standards that people are brought to in academia are malleable. They can continue to be moved. The A, the B, the C, all of this stuff can be positioned around to retrofit the desire, the motivation, the skill set, the ability of the school. The problem is when you get into the real world, that bridge either stays up or it doesn't. And that plane either stays in the sky or it doesn't. And that brain surgery is either a success or it isn't. So yeah, you can continue to manipulate the standards to which students are being held up until the point at which they get into the real world. And as you say, you end up with some pretty squirrely outcomes.
Yeah, and the problem with that is these kids are being taught that it is relative. It's not relative. You get out into the competitive world, it's like, I grew up in athletics.
Sorry, Chris, I think you do a great job, and I understand it is live, but we do need to pick our words a bit more carefully. Grades aren't malleable. They cannot be moved or changed, although I admit there is an element of subjectivity in some areas. Writing or art are easy examples. Just as 2 + 2 = 4, getting 25 out of 25 on a test is 100%. You can say 2 + 2 = 6, but you would be wrong. You can say a person who has failed a test passed, but again, you would be wrong. They are being changed, just as the teacher I mentioned wanted to do, but this doesn't mean she is right. In fact, it means she's an idiot. The truth is not malleable. A grade is an attempt at objectively measuring competence that, although imperfect, is unaltered by my or your feelings on the subject. When students are moved on, having failed a subject, this is not grading, this is a business decision. You can call a duck a dinosaur, but it doesn't change the fact that no one has ever eaten dinosaur à l'orange. As you mentioned, in the real world, mistakes have consequences. Education is the process of preparation for the real world. The interesting problem we are seeing is the renaming of things. Here, you called these malleable things grades. They are not. Imagine me calling a bridge that has fallen down a bridge. That is what is happening. Whether the bridge is standing or crumbled, it is still a bridge. When we do this, we are conflating concepts. The concept of a bridge is a thing that can be used to get from point A to point B over something. The fallen bridge does not have this concept. Expand this notion on your own time. Mostly peaceful protests, insurrectionists, illegal immigrants, migrants, anti-racism, racism, feminism, equality, sex, gender. In order to communicate effectively, our concept of words must closely resemble the concepts of those we are talking to. Media seems to be causing this rift, but we seem to be happily perpetuating it. My father once said to me, "Everyone has the right to play volleyball." Is that a right? Granted by whom? Enforced by whom? Is this the same as the right to freedom, Are we using the same concept here? Do I have the right to go and beat the crap out of an 8-year-olds in elementary school? Either yes, I do have that right, or the wrong concept has been invoked. I suspect the latter. As Dr. Phull points out, in the real world, there are levels and competency is important. If you doubt it, try storming a BJJ dojo.
You know, all these schools have dropped the SAT now because they say it's racially biased. The research says that's not true. The research says that SAT is an opportunity for those gifted kids in the inner city, independent of their grades, to show that they in fact are gifted. And it's the one thing that can lift them out of that and put them into that school because it shows their native intelligence. But the schools won't re-implement it because they will be judged if they do. And they're more interested in virtue signaling than they are actually helping those underprivileged kids. That's the one thing that can pole vault them right back into that school, even if they don't have the grades. They have the native intelligence, the motivation, and the learning ability, but they won't use the SAT because they're virtue signaling and it's on the no good list.
Dr. Phull makes a great point here. The SATs, as well as other more international tests, are a great way for students to show what they know despite the potential less than ideal education they may have received. Also, that we cannot forget about the effects of societal culture, family culture, specific teachers, grading curve, school culture, and many other factors which can combine to help or harm a specific student's education. In terms of virtue signaling, I couldn't agree more. Elon Musk recently said, "What I care about is the reality of goodness, not the perception of it. And what I see all over the place is people who care about looking good while doing evil. F them." In this context, let's talk about hot-button topics after the kids are actually learning the material. Until then, let's maybe focus on the primary goal: education.
And you asked me earlier, you said, well, who is it that's pushing this? Well, I'm telling you who's pushing it. It's virtue signaling corporations and universities. And they're the ones that are shaping the minds of our young people and hiring them with expectations.
I touched on this in several past videos. I'm not sure it is important who is pushing this or anything else. We will never be able to stop evil people from pushing their own agendas. What we can do is try to come to rational choices that will limit their ability to do so. Let me lose the argument by invoking Hitler. There will always be Hitlers. I don't think we can prevent such people from growing into the monsters they will become. What we can do, what was done, was people and governments around the world came together and said, enough. The issue is that we aren't doing this. We are instead using fallacious, inconsistent, childish arguments which keep us tribal. Pick your topic.
It makes me so uncomfortable because, I've read these news articles online, but it almost feels like fiction. It feels like some crazy outlier event that's not a big deal, and I don't know anybody that's been a part of this.
A great point, Chris, and a tricky area indeed. The first problem is one of personal perception. Do I perceive these issues in my life? The second problem is one of narrative-driven media. Are these issues real or confirmation biased, pushed on us by this or that publisher? The third is the change towards more international media. Problems that may be real in Ireland, for example, may or may not be similar in size or scope to those in our countries. Fourthly, and I will stop here for the sake of time, is argument from authority. Tucker Carlson or Jake Tapper or whomever said it, and therefore it is true. The point must be made here, however, that there's one thing that would help people navigate all of these real problems: critical thinking. The fact that I've never seen a murder doesn't mean there isn't murder. Trusting a publisher or talking head is not a reliable method of getting to truth, at least until that source has shown themselves to be largely reliable and unbiased. But can you think of any? Slowly and calmly thinking through problems that others have will help us to understand the actual effect similar things have on our own societies. The current Middle East conflict is a good example to look at here.
So, A question that I've always had is how much of what we're seeing internally is coordination. It's part of some grand plan to try and take down America, or to undo the will of the people, or to confuse them, or to make them feel like victims or narcissists or whatever it might be. How much of it is that? And how much of it is just cowardice from people who don't want to lose their job, or just normal job anxiety? Oh, well, this is the new meta. This is the new meme that everybody needs to follow. This is toxic compassion or performative empathy, and this is what I need to do in order to be able to keep my job.
You're posing an interesting question, but I don't see how the answer matters in terms of coming to a solution. Maybe Hitler controlled the Nazis' way of thinking, such that they did terrible things. Maybe the German people, of the time, simply decided to go along to get along. Maybe we're in a simulation, and our controller is a narcissistic OF girl who hates the Old Testament lovers. Right now, although the answer is interesting, it actually doesn't matter. What does matter is that the Nazis were doing horrible things. When that was understood, people decided to stop them, and they were stopped. In order to reduce future occurrences of similar scenarios, it is worthwhile looking into exactly what happened. But near the end of 1941, the question wasn't why, nor should it have been. The question was how it can be stopped. This is what I'm saying now. It is interesting to think about why or who or what is causing any issue, but the more important idea is how can it be stopped, assuming that maybe it should be. I'm suggesting we're not using critical thinking, but that if we did, we would have a much better shot at stopping the atrocities, whatever they are, that are happening.
Live and let live. If this person is transgender and that's what they want to do, who am I to say what they should or shouldn't do? But when you start pushing the agenda and say, it's not enough that you're okay with what I do, I need you to stand up and announce that you endorse this. It's not enough that you just live and let live. You got to stand up and tell everybody that you endorse what I'm doing. Then they're pushing to the point that people are going to say enough is enough and too much is too much. You don't get to tell me what I'm supposed to do. I don't need you to endorse what I'm doing, and don't demand that I endorse what you're doing.
Another excellent point, Dr. Phull. Freedom of thought is of paramount importance. Restricting that in any way is harmful to humanity. Freedom of speech can produce terrible, hurtful ideas and emotions, but is also absolutely required in order to progress from old ideas to new, better ideas, as well as change the minds of those who hold old, terrible ideas. As he points out, I don't have the power to make you say a damn thing, nor should I. Likewise, you don't have the power to make me say a damn thing. This is why the right often, incorrectly, call the far left fascists, authoritarian notions, and the forcible suppression of the opposition. No one controls the speech of others, not in a free society.
This sounds perilously close to what Jordan Peterson was warning everybody about 6, 7, 8 years ago, even.
Well, it is, in that he was saying that the Canadian government is requiring that you use this language. And he was saying, I will not be compelled by the government to say what you're going to tell me I should say. And that's not happening here. And it's even worse, I think, because we do have freedom of speech with the First Amendment. We're muzzling each other. I feel like I'm in George Orwell's 1984 sometimes when I'm seeing us requiring each other to use certain language and certain words. We're doing it to each other.
Yep, spot on. As someone who has a love-hate relationship with Jordan, he came on the proverbial stage being 100% correct. Governments may not compel speech. Well, governments interested in humanity and progress may not compel speech. Certainly dictatorships and other forms of government have done it, which is one of the reasons Justin Trudeau is receiving so much pushback these days. Another great point by Dr. Phull. It is one thing for cola number 1 to say, don't drink the other colas, but it's much worse for your cola-drinking friend to tell you that you're not allowed to drink cola number 2. Live and let live, or in this case, die and let diabetes. If only there were a simple set of ideas that would allow people to disagree calmly while trying to understand each other's point of view. Finally here, love the 1984 reference. If you want to see what is happening in today's world, I cannot think of a more useful book to read, although Brave New World is also a great choice.
I mean, even when it was written, it would certainly be a criticism of racism by today's standards. It was a criticism of it at the time. But they're going to take that out. How is a reader, a child that's reading that book, a teen that's reading that book, going to learn the lesson in the book if you take it out? I don't understand that. I don't get that. It doesn't make sense to me.
We learn about the horrors of racism by looking at the horrible racist acts of the past. We learn about moral choices by investigating those choices. Children are not ready for all these conversations, so age appropriateness is a thing. But we need monsters if we are to have heroes. And we need to tell the stories of heroes in order to identify the monsters. Back to Jordan for a moment, he is correct that stories are important. They have long been a way to pass down moral as well as immoral concepts. This last point, however, it doesn't make sense to me, is the most important part, and I hear it from many, many people very, very often. When someone's thinking doesn't make sense to you, this is a very telling situation, and there aren't many possibilities here, so quickly, maybe you need to listen more and are simply not understanding their point of view. This very commonly happens, and you can tell this is the case because the inevitable straw man argument appears. This is easily resolved by attempting to steel man the position of the other. Maybe you are operating under a lack of agreement of all the pertinent facts. This commonly happens because of narrative-driven media, what I've previously called narrative-splaining. Confirmation bias is huge here. This is easily resolved by attempting to agree on the facts prior to fully diving into arguments. Maybe, and I think this is the most common reason today, as well as the most difficult to resolve, you're working under different understandings of epistemology. As an example, I don't care about your facts, I care about feelings. That is your truth. But my lived experience, you're denying my existence. One may use any of these, or anything else, to come to an understanding, but we must realize that these will never convince another. So, despite you being perfectly able to come to any belief you have for any reason whatsoever, these types will never cause agreement. Yet, this seems to be the number one method of arguing we've seen from far too many.
That's something that I refer to in the book as presentism. Not my term. I learned it from someone else. And that very simply is taking today's standards, mores and folkways, and applying it to something that happened 250 years ago, as though 250 years ago they were supposed to say, 2 centuries in the future, this is going to be different, so I need to foretell the future and hold myself to that standard.
As an example, prior to the 17th century, people generally thought the Earth was at the center of the universe. They were wrong. Therefore, we should throw out all the important work they did, light diffraction, the calculator, the telescope, Boyle's law, etc., etc. Just because some people were and are horribly wrong does not mean we throw out all of their accomplishments. Instead, we learn from their greatness and also try to learn from their failures. This is the same in education. Yes, we certainly learn when teachers impart knowledge, but we also learn from mistakes that we and others make in and out of the classroom. I hope you've heard about Marie Curie.
The thing that's interesting, or the trend that I think seems new, genuinely novel and new, is how cemented people are in their beliefs, how much less open they seem to be about changing their mind, that if they have a belief that is intrinsic to their sense of self, they hold on to it tightly, they do not want to change it. If they do, that's admitting failure and like destruction, and they can't deal with it.
Yep. This is the ignorant hubris we see with people who haven't learned about the subject they're using to discuss the topic. Imagine you've always lived in log homes. Every year you change to a new log home. You have a lot of experience with log homes in some way. You are a log home expert. Does this mean you know how to use a drop saw, a nail gun, or sandpaper? Of course not. This is analogous to what I'm saying about critical thinking. John follows politics. He listens to his side self-promote and insult or demean the other side. He certainly has some idea about politics, albeit not a complete picture. Does this give him the required tools to discuss politics? Hell no. Just as a log home owner can tell you what he likes or dislikes about log homes, but has no ability to make one, John can tell you what he likes about his party and dislikes about the other, but he has no ability to differentiate good from bad arguments. It's actually worse. The very source of his information, in my experience, is teaching him by way of example bad argumentation techniques. Pick any talking head you like. Although we can't stop people from building bad log homes, we can certainly stop buying them, or if you prefer, although we can't stop publishers from being horribly biased, we can certainly educate ourselves so we understand those biases, thereby improving our arguments and understanding, and, in a capitalistic society, driving them out of business.
Well, I suppose, again, the problem here is that if there is status associated with being a victim, there is an incentive for somebody to find victimhood even where there isn't any.
Incentives are very powerful things. They exist all around us, and I would claim that we don't recognize most of them. My current school has noticed that students, by and large, are not doing their homework. So, they've decided to impose a mandatory vocabulary review for the first 15 minutes of every class. Sounds good, right? Now the students will better be able to remember their new words for their tests, except now the teachers have 15 minutes less class time to teach new material, which only compounds from one class to the next. But to Chris's point, the school is incentivizing students to not do their homework. What's the point? The teacher will review the homework anyway. The tyranny of low expectations basically means that when you treat someone as less than capable, they will remain less than capable or become less than capable. Conversely, if you treat people as capable, their ability actually improves. This is the process of education. Small pushes creating large steps.
A lie travels around the world while the truth is still lacing up its shoes. It's something like that.
Yeah.
And there's actually been a study about that. I think MIT did it. And it actually measured this, and a lie travels 6 times faster than the truth. And the reason for that is a lie is simple and quick and black and white. And the truth is never that clean. It's never that quick. It's more complicated. So a lie is good clickbait. It's a clean headline. And so it travels real quick.
Link in the description of the study and their press release. Strangely, I agree with Dr. Phil here, but he's wrong. And that is kind of the point. Edit that out of the video. Let me change my answer. Yes, Dr. Phil, you are a living legend. That is precisely what the study said, and the work you are doing is the only thing that can possibly save our otherwise doomed existence. Wait. No. Edit that out of the video. Let me change my answer. No, Dr. Phil, you got it completely wrong. You're out here spouting lies and nonsense, a bane to our existence. Those are the kind of headlines we respond to. Quick and dirty. A simple take on a complex problem. Those are the kind of takes that get the clicks. The study found that these takes are the ones that induce fear, disgust, and surprise. The truth, however, as Dr. Phil says, is longer and more complicated and less likely to get clicks. The study actually found that novelty was a large part of the reason, as well as the fear, disgust, and surprise I just mentioned, and feelings of anticipation, sadness, joy, and trust that came with the true news. So I agree with Dr. Phil, the quick bites do travel faster, but the study didn't look at simplicity. It looked at the feelings induced by the stories, which were both true and false. So it's easy to retell a simple story. A cool, simple story is a good story to retell. It is less easy to retell a complicated story. A complicated story is more difficult to listen to. But the truth, by its very nature, is complicated, thus travels slowly and requires more work. What do you think entertains more people at the end of most days? The Office or TED Radio Hour?
Number one, be who you are on purpose. So be who you are on purpose. Don't let the internet program you. Don't let some ideology program you. Choose who you want to be and what you think is important.
Couldn't agree more. We do have to be a bit careful, though, and I'm sure Dr. Phull would agree. The Jeffrey Dahmers of the world should maybe stop being exactly as they want to be.
You pair that up with the thought that choose all behaviors based on results and all thoughts based on rationality. And rationality means, is this thought based on fact? Does it get me what I want? Does it protect and prolong my life? I mean, there are just simple tests that you can ask yourself. Is this really something that makes sense? Easy questions you can ask yourself when you're thinking something. Is this factual? Have I verified this, or is this something I'm telling myself?
Look, I'd say I'm one of the largest proponents of rationality in thoughts and behavior. However, and I would guess we're back to the lies travel faster than the truth, all thoughts? All behavior? No, I certainly wouldn't go that far. There are many examples of things other than rationality which have led us to some of our proudest moments as a species. Art, penicillin, and the tea bag. Grow up, not that tea bag. Although, it still applies. If there is something that our current science can't measure, then I worry that rationality alone, in all thoughts and behaviors, may impede that discovery. After that discovery is made, however, you still have to explain it to me. That is going to require some, perhaps new addition to our current understanding of rationality. Otherwise, spot on, my man. It isn't hard to make a modicum of effort to critically think, assuming one knows what that means.
Focusing on solving problems rather than winning arguments. I see so much of the discourse online is all about winning arguments rather than solving problems.
Hell yes, it is. Why do you think that is? There were some good points made about ego and visibility, as well as some good points made about time invested here made by Chris. All very valid and correct points about the psychology behind arguing online. However, there exists an underlying problem. Not enough people know how this is done. We're not teaching it in schools, and we're not modeling it in media. If more people knew about critical thinking, fallacies, and epistemology in general, we would see more peer correction in this area. That would further tilt the pendulum into a space where the level of communication would greatly improve, not solve all disagreements, but merely prevent many of the pitfalls and misunderstandings. Videos like Dumb Americans Don't Know Basic Facts are popular because we expect others to know the answers to the simple questions being asked. You don't get away with 2 + 2 = 83 because we all know the answer. When the average person has this sort of knowledge about fallacies, the number of fallacies being adhered to will go down. That's kind of the simple point.
Fact check me, and if there are some things I said that are not factual, then come back to me with it, and let's talk about that.
Yep. Mistakes allow us to correct ourselves. They allow us to learn and grow. They allow us to find our weaknesses, giving us the option of working on them. Your belief is only as strong as its greatest criticism is weak. We should all try our very best to understand the greatest criticisms of our positions, but that's difficult. And well, look, I've got to get running. World's Funniest Memes is on.